her what she said. It is a teeny little place, and I'm going to tell you what it's famous for. It is famous years ago because it had some of the biggest plantations, like before the Civil War. It had some of the biggest plantations in Stokes County. It had one of the biggest plantations in the whole state of North Carolina. So that's one reason it's famous in the past. And what it's famous for now, like she said, there's a post office, there's a school, but a lot of towns have that. However, there was a big company that was started here. Does anybody know this company that has the name in it?
Pine Hall Brick is what I think of when I think of Pine Hall.
That is very famous. Pine Hall Brick is shipped all over the country.
My dad was a brick mason. He had to come here for like 40 years. That's
How
where
cool
they
is
got the
that?
brick.
I didn't know that. I know her dad. I didn't know he was a brick mason. Some of you 4-Hers went on a tour one time, a summer fun tour. Do y'all remember that? You went to Pine Hall Brick? You went, didn't you? I know Malachi went. I saw Jocelyn's picture too. So Pine Hall is famous in the past for plantations, now for a big company. But something else it's known for that I had forgotten. In 1998, an EF1 tornado touched down in Pine Hall. I had forgotten that. It was in March, and it touched down like in the northeastern part of Pine Hall. Morning Star Baptist Church, I don't know if anybody knows where that is in Pine Hall. It literally touched down there and blew out the windows in the church from the pressure. And the tornado was on the ground for about 1.5 miles in Pine Hall. And then it lifted up and went into Rockingham County and landed in Stoneville. And you might remember in Stoneville, 2 people were killed when that tornado touched down. Stoneville's just in the next county. So that's one thing, if you Google Pine Hall, the tornado often comes up. But let's go back in history a little bit. I'm going to focus on, I think I have 5 things, well 6 things. And they're very interesting things, I think. Number 1. There was a plantation here that I told you was one of the biggest in the state. And a lot of you may know some people with the last name of Hairston. How many people know somebody with that last name Hairston?
Is that from the glass in the church that we went to?
Yes.
Okay.
Great point. I forgot that.
That's the only time I've ever heard that.
Yes. Well, see, she remembers when we went to Christ Episcopal Church a few months back, and the stained glass windows were in memory of Hairston's. Well, it's interesting because the white people who ran the plantation, their name was pronounced Hairston. But the slaves later, when they were freed, began to pronounce it Hairston, which is the way it's spelled, H-A-I-R, like your literal hair. So that is one of the biggest family names of black people in the United States, is Hairston. I know a Major League Baseball player by that name. There was a famous actor named Jester Hairston who was in movies. Do y'all know this song? Amen. Know that song? Jester Hairston wrote that song, and he was from not far from here. So that plantation was probably a little bit that way from where you all are. Now, I think all of you moms driving came in that way. Did you notice that straight across from this road was a road called Shoebuckle Road? I don't know if you saw that. Some of you kids might have seen it. Shoebuckle was a plantation, a giant plantation, and the man who had the Hairston plantation bought that too. He bought so much, I wrote down, here it is, 12,000 to 14,000 acres of land he ended up owning. Let me tell you a little bit about him because it's a sad but interesting story. This man's name was Peter Hairston. He was born in Virginia, 1752. So we were not yet the United States of America, if you know your history by that time. He was Scottish, his family was. He was a little short, stocky man with a real thick neck like a bull, and they said he was a fiery tempered man, but very, very intelligent man. He started buying up land around here, and as a young man, he fought in the Revolutionary War, became a major in the war. And after that, he married, and he and his wife settled down on the plantation. He kept buying up land, and he established something called the Saratown Plantation. Who knows what that's named after? He's exactly right. Saratown Mountain from the Sarah Indians. So Saratown Plantation was named that because the Sarah Indian camp, where they had lived for hundreds of years, was right across the river from his plantation. So he named it Saratown Plantation. He and his wife had one daughter named Ruth. But here's the thing. This is the sad part of the story. He was, First, let's go to the good part. He was very prosperous. He raised tobacco. He had a general store in Germantown. Now think of how far that would have been by horse and buggy, all the way to Germantown for his general store. He had an iron forge. Remember when we visited Martock Park at the old iron furnace? He had a smaller one down this way. He exported ginseng and bear skins. That means there had to be lots of bears around here back then. Now, he, by 1830, which was right before he died, he had 293 slaves. That was a lot, because most people didn't have any around here. They just had a little farm and they worked it themselves. So this was a lot for at that time for this area. Well, in 1785, he purchased a young black slave named Sally. Her name was Sally Blagg, and he purchased her for a barrel of tobacco. He gave somebody a barrel of tobacco, they gave him this slave. His wife died. His white wife died of some kind of a sickness. He was a widower. He fell in love with the slave woman. But y'all think about this. This is the late 1700s. It wasn't allowed for a white man to marry a black woman. He tried to marry her, and the law would not allow it. So he entered into, I guess, what would you call it, a common law marriage, where the law wouldn't allow it, but he committed to her. They were married until he died in 1832. Common law, not by the state of North Carolina. They had 7 children together. He taught all of his children, of course they would have been half black, half white. He taught them all how to read, how to write. They were very, very intelligent children that he put the sons to manage his plantation, because he had no white sons. He just had one white daughter. So he put the sons to work managing the plantation, and he said in his will, I'm going to leave the plantation to my sons to have. But the Stokes County Register of Deeds at that time would not write it down as legal, because he said you cannot leave your property to black children. Well, they were adults by then, but they were his children, so they didn't allow it. So when he died, his sons, who had been free all that time managing the plantation, had to go back into slavery for their half sister. But this man knew that it might happen. Peter Hairston knew that. So he put in his will that my 7 children, the ones who were half black, half white, can never belong to my daughter. Do you know why that is? It would have been a sister owning her siblings as slaves. So he put it in his will, she can never own those slaves. She could use them, but she can never own them. He passed down ownership to his great-grandchildren. I thought that was just an absolutely fascinating story, a sad story.
I wonder how Ruth felt about her half-sibling.
I've read the book that's written. There's a whole book about this called The Hairstons, but I can't remember what it said about her.
Is that why there's so many rocks? Because of the tornado everywhere?
Well, that's a good question, but I doubt it came this close. I think it was, I don't know where northeast, I'm sorry to say I don't know where northeast is, but that's where it was. But that's still a good question. Now, that was the first focus, was just the background of Pine Hall. Second focus was the Hairston Plantation. Now, let's talk about where you are right now. This is, as you see that sign right there, the Pine Hall Baptist Church. It's actually the Pine Hall Missionary Baptist Church. It started as a little brush arbor church on the Hairston Plantation with the black people. This is a traditionally black church. Does anybody know what a brush arbor church is? Anybody?
I've heard that a lot, but I don't know what it is.
Just means they met out in the woods. Just meant they put like shrubs and bushes like on top of poles, and they could meet out in the woods.
Out of necessity, or to be incognito?
Pretty much out of necessity, because nobody would build them buildings usually back then. However, they were able to finally build a small wooden building that they called the Pole Bridge Church. They called it Pole Bridge Church because to get there they had to walk to church, the black people back then. They would cross a footbridge made of poles. And if you notice, this road is now called Pole Bridge Road because they had to walk across a bridge to get to their little wooden building. Now, in 1904, think about how long ago that was. That's over 100 years ago. In 1904, they bought this land right here where we are. They bought this land and they built a very small wooden church somewhere. Actually, it could have been in here. I'm not sure. Or it may have been in the bigger building. a very small, it didn't look like this, it was wooden. And they named it, they changed the name of it and called it Pine Hall Missionary Baptist Church, like the sign says. And in 1960, they covered it with brick. They took the little wooden church and they covered it with brick, and then they needed something even bigger. So in 1998, they built a new sanctuary. I guess it is that one. They built that new sanctuary around the original wooden church. So the original one from 1904 is inside that. I've been in there. They're thriving today. They have a good church. I have some friends who go there. They have a cemetery here. All right, that's the focus number 3. Focus number 4 is right here. That's why I wanted to meet here, but I had to get permission. The pastor gave us permission. He did message me back finally today. So I just noticed that says Pine Hall Baptist Church 1905. All of my records said it was built in 1904. Maybe they dedicated it in 1905, and means it was probably here instead of the other building. I bet it was here. So, right across the road here, the black children in the early 1900s had nowhere to go to school around here. But in 1904, this school was built just a short distance that way for white children. Well, they only used it for about 6 years. And in 1910, the white children got a better school and said that they would give this one to the black children. But the problem is that it was, like I said, it was up there somewhere. So what they did is they got horses and wagons, and they moved that building. It took them 3 days to use the horses to move that building to where you see it right now.
That's crazy.
It took a few more years to get it fixed back up and get it ready, but in 1915, now think about that, that's about World War I time. In 1915, it opened. And at that time, it was called, I want to get this right, yes, it was called the Pole Bridge School. Again, because of that pole bridge near here where people had to walk across to get to the original church. And it was only for grades 1 through 8. So how many of you, raise your hand if you're already past grade 8? So that's 1, 2, 3 of y'all already out of grade 8. You wouldn't be able to go to school here anymore. You would have to find somewhere else to go. And a lot of them would go to Madison, or they would find a way to go get room and board in Winston-Salem where there were schools, because there weren't schools for black children in Stokes County at that time. So after 8th grade, you were out of here. But here's the thing. Let's say that Christian, back in the day, let's say she was a black woman back in the day who wanted an education, and she was 21 years old, and she'd never been to school. She could go here. So it wasn't like when you were 13 or 14 in 8th grade, then you were out of here. You could go here till you, I don't know, I suppose till you were middle-aged or whatever, to get your education through 8th grade level. It wasn't by age. In fact, I met a man years ago right over there. I was inside that school for a tour. A man named Mr. Leonard Hairston said, I believe it was his dad. Yes, his dad went to school there and finished 8th grade when he was 28 years old. And he wanted a higher education, and he had to go to Winston-Salem to go into high school level. Isn't that fascinating? 28-year-old man is in school over there in 8th grade because he was that determined to get an education. I wish my 5 kids I had homeschooled no offense to y'all, appreciated education the way I believe people did years ago. Now, there was a lady who went to that school, and she went to this church. Her name was Mrs. Betty Hairston Scales. She died a few months ago in January. She was 102 years old. And I went and sat with her at her house one day and talked to her about going to school here. It was fascinating. She told me what it was like. She said that the boys, so let's say all you all went to school here. Malachi, Mason, Shepherd, Noah. He might have still been, no offense, you might have still been too young to help yet. The older boys would have gotten here before all you girls. And they would go in and get the fire going. They would get stuff ready. So the boys would go in and do that. And she said at the back of the school, wherever that would have been, there was like a big bucket or something with one dipper. So whenever you got thirsty, you go to that dipper and you get you some water. Which means, you know, if you're a germaphobe, you had to drink after everybody else. They didn't know the concept of passing things around the way we do now. So they all shared the same dipper. And she said that of course everybody brought their lunch. There was no school cafeteria. And she said when they brought their lunch, if any of the kids opened their little, probably like a little wooden bucket or something they brought, I don't know if they had paper sacks much in the early 1900s, I'm not sure. But she said when they opened up their lunch, whichever kids brought bologna were like the envy of the school. Like if you brought a bologna sandwich, every other kid was looking at you like, oh, I wish I had that. I have no idea why that was so.
I guess bologna was hard to come by.
It could have been, I don't know.
Well, you know, most people didn't eat meat every day.
That's
I mean,
true.
And, you know, you didn't have access to meat every day, whether you were black or white.
That's true.
And, you know, even an 8th grade education, a lot of young men had to work the farm. So
That's
they
right.
might have went to the 8th grade and then they had to go work the farm. You know, my grandpa did.
She's exactly right.
So, because they had to raise tobacco and had to, you know, make a living.
That's right.
So, you know, education was valuable, but it's definitely a privilege. It wasn't a entitled thing for anyone.
She's right. A privilege. I like that word.
And would it have been like the school in Danbury? This is the only other one that we visited. Remember on the river, we went into that school.
Y'all remember that up in Danbury?
Would that have been through 8th grade, just like
I
that?
think so. I'm not sure.
But didn't you say that there was only one other one, and this is the one you were talking
This
about?
is the one that we talked about.
Okay.
Y'all are bringing up stuff I've forgotten. Thank you so much. We were at the little one on the Dan River in Danbury. Yes, this
There's
was
only
fun.
2 in Stokes County.
There could have been one up in King that I don't know about, but if there was, I don't know it. So whoever watches this later, you can message me if you know of one, but I don't. They were very, very rare, the black schools, in the early days. Now, the church in 1952, they closed the school. So it operated from 1915 to 1952. They closed it when they built a better school in Walnut Cove, London School, where my daughter is at work right now. She works you live near London School. That was built for the black children in the 1950s. This was closed. So the church bought the school in 1952, and they started, working on it to keep it, keep it nice, and it is still being restored. They're trying to get it back to the way it looked in the early 1900s. The pastor told me that just this morning, that they're still working on it. Love that roof. Yeah,
I would pay to have my roof look like that.
I love it. And inside, I don't know if I want to do it just like that. Inside at the back, there's a plaque that hangs that says, and you'll recognize this biblically, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And Miss Betty Hairston, who died, as I told you, Miss Betty Scales at 102, she said that was the motto of the school, that the children were taught Christianity along with their everyday lessons, and they were taught to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So they now put a plaque on the back wall, just like Miss Hairston had when she was a little girl going there. I thought that was cool. Now, when we leave here in just a few minutes, so moms, let's see, we got 4 of us moms driving. You might want to help me remember to point it out to your passengers. We're going to go out this road.
Should I keep on recording?
Yeah, keep going. We're not. I'm going to tell you about what you're going to see because we're not going to stop there. I don't have permission to stop at the next place. So when we're going to go to the end of this road, we're going to take a left. That's going to take you right by Pine Hall School. Okay, you kids will see the school. When you're in the car and look on your left, you'll see Pine Hall Elementary School. On the right, and I don't know if trees cover it now, I'm not sure, but straight across from the school, there's a long driveway that goes to a big rambling brick house, which was the original Pine Hall Plantation. Not the Saratown Plantation that I told you was over, well, we could be on Saratown land right now. Wasn't that one. This was a different one, and that's where the town got its name. Pine Hall from the Pine Hall Plantation. So when you moms go by there, if you think about it, see if you can see it. Well, y'all keep driving. You can't see if you can see it. It'll be on your right as we go. Now, there was a man who started buying up a bunch of land right there near the school. There was no school back then. He started buying up the land until he started out with 747 acres. He ended up with around 1,000, which is a lot of land. Not as much as Mr. Peter Hairston had, but still a lot of land. I bet that video is not hearing me now. You might want to come a little closer now.
I don't know that would do much.
That wind is howling out here. Now, this man's name was Leonard Anderson. And it's interesting because I went to school, and Melissa may have too. We went to South Stokes. I went to school with a lot of black people with the last name of Anderson from Pine Hall. So I assumed they came from that original plantation, Pine Hall, after they were freed. Just like all my friends at the Hairstons, tons of Hairston at South Stokes School when I went there, came from the Hairston plantation. So this man, Mr. Leonard Hairston, bought this land for his plantation, and in 1859, he finished building the beautiful brick house that you're going to see. I hope you see it. I hope the trees don't cover it. So it's the same house that's been there since 1859. Why did he build such a big, beautiful Greek revival style house? He always said he built it because he was marrying a Virginia belle. He was marrying a fancy lady from Virginia. She was a descendant of Patrick Henry. Anybody know that name? Give me liberty or give me death. That revolutionary hero. One of his descendants, one of the first families of Virginia, he married a daughter of that family. And he said he built that house for her. And they had a child who died of typhoid fever. So you know what he did? They said he was such a nice man that he would take in families who had nowhere to go. And after the Civil War, a lot of families were displaced. They were burned out of their homes. He'd take them in. And if they couldn't take care of their children, he'd help take care of their children. And he sort of unofficially adopted several children who came. They said he was a very nice man. Several children who came to stay with him. He ended up leaving his plantation to one of those adopted nieces, one of the family members he had taken in. He started a school. The first school we know of for white children in Pine Hall, he started a school. So I think it's interesting that his plantation is right across from the present school for children in Pine Hall. He had about 30 slaves. Big difference from Mr. Peter Hairston, huge difference. So he only had about 30 slaves. Let's see, when he passed on the plantation, he passed it on to his niece who had married a doctor, a medical doctor, named Mr. Haynes. Mr. Haynes practiced medicine in the Pine Hall area for I think it was 32 years. Yeah, 32 years. That is focus number 5 that you're going to see, the Pine Hall Plantation. And this is the final focus. So moms, when we pass the Pine Hall School, kids will be looking for the school on your left, the plantation on your right. We'll come to the end of the road to the intersection there. I forget the name of that. It has a name. We're going to take a right to go to the community center. As soon as you take a right, start looking on your right because there's a brick church back in the woods. You may have been there. I know you've seen it.
Is that on 311?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you for clarifying.
Okay.
It is on 311 like you're going toward Madison. Before we get to the community center, which will be on your left, the church is on the right. It is called the Pine Hall Presbyterian Church. It was begun in 1870. That's a long time ago. That's like 153 years ago. They started this church, and it was a primarily white church. They started this in a home in Pine Hall. A big family, a well-to-do family called the Blackwells. They started the church in their home, and then the Blackwell family donated a half an acre and said, y'all can build a church. Instead of meeting in our home, let's build a church. Later, the Blackwell family gave another 14 acres so they could have room for a big church and a cemetery as well. So the church you're going to see was actually built in 1899. So quite a while ago. It was built by another family, big important family, called the Dalton family. I know we went to school with probably a lot of Daltons in South Stokes. There was another plantation